A very warm welcome to this fantastic event at the Lockdown LitFest, where I am delighted to introduce not only a female Emirati word artist, but the first female Emirati word artist, who is not just a rising star, she is already a huge star. She has graced so many platforms, not least the billion-dollar Dubai Opera, where she was the star of the show at their first ever spoken word event. Afra Atiq, a very warm welcome to Lockdown LitFest. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First, can we define, for those that don't know, we're all familiar with the term poet, we're all familiar with the term poetry. How do you define word artist?
Okay, starting with a difficult question. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's different from regular poetry. I think that poetry is meant to be experienced, and I think spoken word is just experiential poetry, performed poetry. So has a more live performative element, I would say.
There's quite a range that you do. You have produced a fantastic piece called A Good Punch, which is perhaps the most heart-rending and emotionally moving work I've ever heard regarding to counter racism, I suppose. What's the wellspring on which you draw for ideas that become works that you hone and craft?
I'm flattered that you think so highly of the poem.
It makes me cry every time, Afra.
Poetry tears are good tears. That's what I always say. I think it's about being relatable. It's about being authentic. It's about being realistic in the things that you're talking about. And I think often starting out, poets talk about, or at least myself, I talked about all of the big issues and everything that I wanted to change with the world and everything that was going on in the world. And I reached a point where I realized, okay, this is great. This is amazing. We do need to be talking about these things, but where is Afra in all of this? And so it's zooming in on the big issues, but also how they relate to you and how they relate to everyone else, and drawing on my own experience and drawing on things that I've observed, things that I've gone through, things that I know about, and it makes it more authentic and true to myself. So I think that's the key here. It's not always pleasant, but it's important.
Yeah, you see, I absolutely agree with you. It is important. You also hint at something that I've long believed. In fact, that wiser wiser people than I have put far more eloquently than I'm about to. But that for any creative artist, the closer you get to your own human truths, your own personal emotions, the wider your audience, the more it will resonate with other people. Because of course we are all human, we all do feel the same things. Is that what you're sort of aiming for? That you can peak in other people, you can create in other people the emotions that drove you to write the piece in the first place?
I would agree with that, and I would also say that art has always been about humanity, and poetry has always been about humanity, and it's about finding that human connection that we all share and bringing that out in a creative medium. With A Good Punch particularly, it was a poem that came from a lot of pain, it came from a lot of struggle, and the process was actually taking that experience and turning it into something creative and making it something that is beautiful in its own sense. So I think it's about finding that human element.
Before we talk a bit more about A Good Punch, can I backtrack a little? When did you first become aware that poetry was a thing? Was the poetry in the house? I know that obviously I'm talking to you from the middle of rural England. You are in the middle of Dubai. You're an Emirati woman. And I know that, of course, the literary custom, the literary tradition in the Emirates is predominantly poetry. Was that your first poetry experience?
I think that I am blessed to come from a culture that has a very proud tradition of poetry and storytelling, and I consider myself to be continuing that legacy. And I think that it's important to me to hold on to that. We're known in the Emirates for our poetry, for our storytelling. And I feel like, in a sense, I'm just carrying on that tradition. And so my experience with poetry has been that experience of traditional, I don't want to say traditional, but the tradition of storytelling and poetry. and also being exposed to a lot of books as a child, being, you know, a reader. And so it's all of these things that come together, but particularly we are known for our poetry. So I kind of feel like I'm just carrying on that tradition. And it's a proud tradition, and it's a tradition that I don't take lightly at all. I've had comments, you know, Afra, why are you take this so seriously, and you take yourself so seriously, you take your craft so seriously. And I feel like it's a responsibility to carry that tradition, and it's something that I think about. And I always say that every time I step onto a stage, I'm feeling that responsibility. Every time I address a crowd, it's a responsibility, and it's a responsibility to myself and to that tradition of poetry and storytelling.
And that comes through in every performance I've ever seen of yours. And there are a lot of performances on YouTube where you are so in the moment and carrying that responsibility. You know, I can see it on your shoulders. You really want to do the best for the form, for your audience, and for the pieces that you've created. I know that one of your parents is, of course, Japanese, and of course, Japan has a huge history of exquisite poetic forms. Have they influenced you at all?
I've been influenced by different cultures and by my heritage. You know, my mother's heritage is Japanese, so it's a tradition that I bring in terms of the process, and in terms of the things that I bring to the performative elements that I bring to my to the stages that I'm on. But I would say most of all, I've been influenced by where I live in Dubai. It's such a multicultural city, and it's such a vibrant city that just has so many different people from so many different cultures, from so many different backgrounds, from so many walks of life. And I think it's that kind of diversity that's really been embedded in my craft and embedded in who I am as a person.
Most of what I've heard of your material is in English. Do you write solely in English? Do you also write in Arabic? And I think you're multilingual. I think you also speak French. Is that correct?
Yes, I recently learned French, and I do poetry in English. I do poetry. It's kind of a fusion poetry, so bilingual, English and Arabic together. And I do poetry also in a little bit of French. I'm going to emphasize the little bit, but it is interesting to live on that cusp of different languages, because there are things that are not conveyed in the same sense, and things that get lost in translation. So it's interesting to use different languages and bring them together. But I think it's also amazing in terms of just bringing different cultures together and different traditions together. You know, Arabic poetry is very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but let's just leave it at that. And it's such a beautiful medium, and to be able to take elements of Arabic poetry and the Arabic language and bring it into a poem that's predominantly English, and also bring it to different audiences, I think is incredible. I think it's one of the few arts is one of the few areas where you can do that and you can bridge these things successfully.
I've had the honor of being on stage with you at a number of different literary festivals, and I've introduced you to a stage when people, you know, there are 1,000 people in a room who don't know who you are, don't know what to expect. And I've seen them do that most exquisite of things, where they're sort of leaning back in their chairs to begin with, sort of quite aggressively saying, you know, okay, entertain me. And watching you as you start to perform, watching the audience move forward, lean forward in their seats, put their elbows on their knees, put their heads in their hands, lean on the chair in front as you win them over. As a performer who really cares so much about their work, and as you have very eloquently explained your responsibility that you feel to the form, how does that feel when you can feel a room shift so it's supporting you and with you and behind you rather than in front of you just wanting to be entertained? That must be amazing.
It's such an amazing feeling, and I really do feel so blessed to be able to do that. But it's not just about me, it's about that connection that you get through poetry with the audience. One of my favorite things to do in the world is, so I do a lot of school visits, and normally when I walk into classrooms and I ask the students if they like poetry, I say, put your hands up if you like poetry. And maybe there'll be one hand that comes up. Maybe there'll be somebody who puts their hand up and brings it back down. And then I have them live in the moment through poetry and experience poetry. And it's amazing to see the shift. And then I ask them later, how many of you like poetry? And everybody's hand goes up almost. So it's such an incredible feeling. And I feel like it's such an amazing blessing to be able to do that, to literally change things through poetry. I think it's incredible.
Well, it's a very, very powerful gift that you have, and you handle it with wisdom and enormous sensitivity. Now, I know that you prefer performing to live audiences from a raised stage, and this is something of a different environment for you, but you've kindly agreed to perform 2 poems for us. Would you like to perhaps introduce the first one for us? And should we both turn to the audience so they can see us? Thank you, Afra.
So the first poem I'm doing is a poem called Numbers, and it's a poem about the things that you're told you can't do and the things that people or the experiences that go with that, and being told you can't do something. And at one point in time, I was told that I couldn't be a poet, and I was told that I shouldn't be a poet, which I think is, in retrospect, was a strange situation to be in. But this is a poem called Numbers. I've never been good with numbers or names or remembering where I parked. I won't be able to match your face to your name, but I can tell you exactly what I was thinking about eating when we met. You were a cheeseburger and I was a salad, but who am I kidding? I don't like salads. They say there's no equation for the number of times you will try and fail. Failure is the product of effort and imagination divided by the number of setbacks. I am not good with numbers. You said I was your 7. I was your perfect prime number, not the visible, undeniable. You said 7. It was 7 times I would look for you before I realized you weren't coming back 9 times. I repeated the song. You played me. You strummed your guitar. You played me. 4 years since the last time I looked in the mirror and saw who I thought I knew. 5 is the number of years I spent in college. 11 is the number of guys who graduated because of me, who would never know or see a college degree without help from me. It was the 2nd of August, 2013. 2 plus 8 plus 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 3 is 16. The year I learned that friendship sinks and not every hand held out is a hand worth holding. Last time I held a hand, she was in a hospital room getting ready to die. Death doesn't scare me. Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty still scares me. I can't get over it. Believe me, I tried to play by the rules, but that's a lie. Lies go full circle like pupils dilating, like dialing on an old-fashioned telephone. 05054. I still remember your phone number, but I never let it ring, so I settle for the dial tone. 12 is how old I was the first time I ever felt unbeautiful, because he said I was. 21 is 12 backwards. The year I realized that my thinking was backwards. Words cut stranger shapes from strangers. Words, letters, A's, B's, C's, D's, D's, D's. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Ruby shoes. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Each number bears a significance that we cannot see until we experience that instance when we realize who we are and why we are them. I remember you said I could never be a poet because I could never even put 100 words together, and you're right. I can't give you 100 words. Instead, I'll give you 255. There's 200 just because, and 55 for good measure for every time you said my words wouldn't take me anywhere. Hand in hand, holding, folding, touting, telling truth. No use lies to find this time. Lies don't fly sky high. You and me, you and I not seeing eye to eye. We never walk together, drifting apart. Is my art words on a brush? Hush. Don't say that. A picture's worth 1,000 words unheard. Absurd. I remember rains as planes as the trains of our thoughts that we bought. A penny for your thoughts, a penny for the many times we replayed that September before the last December. When we splint, stash, live outside the box, unlock, stop and stop. I remember you said I could never be a poet, but I've never been good with numbers. Thank you.
Bravo. Afra Atiq, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have another poem from her very shortly. How do you do that? I just don't know how you do that. I can see the passion in your face and it comes across in your voice. You're one hell of a performer.
Thank you so much.
There's a poem you've written, it's your only love poem, and I know you're not going to perform it because it's up for a major prize and there's a sort of a sanction on it. But there is a fantastic line there. It's called Dear Food. Am I correct? It's the only love poem you've written?
Sorry?
Am I correct? It's the only love poem that you've written, Dear Food?
You are correct in that.
And it has that lovely, lovely line in it. I lost the me that I was when we were together. I mean, that's just a beautiful, beautiful sentence. and I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but can you lift for our audience, for your audience, Afra, could you lift the veil a little on the process of how you get from a thought to a line such as, I lost the me that I was when we were together? How many processes, how much honing, how much polishing goes into something like that?
I don't really think that's the best example, because that's kind of, that's a poem that was written kind of in a single stream of consciousness. So there wasn't really that much of a process that went into it. But often as artwork goes, you don't know where you start and where you're going to end. And you might have an idea thinking, okay, I know where this is going. And then you get there and you realize, oh, this is nowhere near where I was going. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But the where you start isn't necessarily where you're going to end. So generally, my process is to think about things and how they relate to one another. So I do a lot of word associations. I do a lot of thinking and connecting things in that sense. I'm not really very metaphorical. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm generally not very metaphorical. So that's just how my process goes. I count syllables. I think about how things are going to sound on stage, because I think that there's a difference between page poetry and stage poetry. I think the most important thing is to trust your instincts. And this is something that I've learned over the years, to trust the process and trust your instincts and trust that where you're going to end, though may not be where you want to end, that you in your capacity as an artist are able to make that journey.
That's incredibly well put. So therefore, can you tell us when and where was your first performance? When was you first tried this out and thought, I want to do this, let's see if I can?
So I think there actually, I don't know that there's a way to pinpoint it, because I've been doing this for so long, and I remember even, being as young as maybe 6th or 7th grade, and writing poetry and reciting poetry, and so I think I feel like if on a personal level that was my beginning. That was when it really took off. But I've always loved words. I've always loved the idea of bringing words out there, and I'm somebody who's always understood the weight of words, as cliche as that sounds, and understanding their impact that they have on everybody. So I would say maybe reciting poetry around 6th grade.
Good heavens. That's a hell of an early start.
That is a very, very long time ago.
Well, not from where I'm standing, Afra. The colour of my hair gives it away that it's probably, yes. For you, it may be a long time ago. For me, it's probably sort of 5 minutes in your years. Can we talk about what you do outside the world of word artistry, of poetry? I know that you are a PhD candidate. Your master's was in diplomacy, is that right?
Yes.
What are you doing for your doctoral thesis, and how is it going?
It's going. I'm going to leave it at that. I am blessed with my PhD journey that I have an incredibly supportive PhD advisor who's been there since day one. So she's just been incredible in terms of honing the study that I was doing. So basically, I'm looking at how Arab readers and Arab writers are using Instagram. And so I'm looking at 2 theories. One is the uses and gratifications theory, and the other is gatekeeping theory, to understand where things are headed and kind of the progression. So looking at why self-identified Arab readers are using Instagram, what they're getting out of it, and then on the flip side, how Arab writers are using Instagram and what that's doing to the world that we're living in. And what's really interesting is that it's a mixed method study. So there was quantitative, which basically has been the bane of my existence for the last 2 years, and then there's a qualitative aspect. And so having a mixed method study like that has given a different perspective, because when you look at social media, you're not just looking at people who consume content, but you're also looking at people who create the content.
Yeah.
So it was important. I fought them when they told me that I had to do a quantitative component, but I think it worked out pretty well in the end.
Fantastic. I know that you're incredibly active in the community as well. You do mentorships and workshops, and you take your craft into schools and universities. This obviously is hugely important to you. Where did this start? How did this begin?
So I am from a family of teachers. My father was a teacher, my aunts were teachers, and education has always been a central pillar in our family, and it's what I was raised on. It's also a central pillar of everything that the UAE does. So it was just the natural progression to have that sense of wanting to give back to the community and wanting to give back through education. And I think that the only way, I say this all the time, the only way that things are going to change, the only way that we are going to create the world that we want to live in, the world that we want to see, and the world that we want to leave behind for our children and children's children, is through education and art. Those are, in my opinion, the only two ways. And so I love taking my craft into schools. I love going into universities. And I think it's important. You know, the arts globally, I think they're correct me if I'm wrong, but they're the kind of the least funded when it comes to programming, and I think that it's incredibly important that we keep poetry in schools, that we keep literature in schools, that we keep art and music in schools.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make, actually. I was reading some stats recently, I think it was in relation to America, that in terms of government funding, the arts receive less federal funding than industry and agriculture, but produce something like 20 to 25% of the GDP of the United States of America, you know, to the tune of 200, 300 billion is the money that the product of creative content creates for the United States of America. It's a hell of a disparity, and I'm sure that's probably mirrored all over the world. Perhaps you'd like to walk us into, please, your second performance, if you may. I'm dying to hear some more of you.
I will in just one second. I do want to point out that in the UAE we are supporting arts programs in schools, so that there are ways to keep it in schools, and I feel like me taking poetry into schools is my way of making that contribution. So just putting it out there.
No, you're quite right. Forgive me. I was not impugning the reputation of the UAE at all. I know.
Of course.
I know, you know, from my involvement with the Emirates Airlines Festival of Literature for 10 years, how very important the arts are and how well funded they are in the UAE. Sorry. Actually, before we come to the second piece, there's something I wanted to ask you, which is, you mentioned in the first one, there's a line in your first poem of the 11 people who graduated through your help. Was that school graduation? Were you helping people with homework and so on?
No, this was actually through later in college, and it was helping, but it was also being taken for granted in that respect. So
I see.
Yeah.
I suddenly had the line echoing through my head as you were speaking, and I was suddenly aware of a poignancy that I hadn't hitherto recognised in it. So sorry for wanting to tease that one apart. I mean, it's impressive that the will to teach and the will to assist and the will to help people up. You know, it's what's great in the position that you're in is that you have not raised the ladder up behind you, but you are holding the hands of people that are trying to climb the ladder up behind you, and that's absolutely commendable and correct, of course.
I think it's important. I think you have to create opportunities, and you have to create the opportunities that you didn't have, and the opportunities you wanted to have. And it's about community. It's never been about just me. It's been about lifting a community and helping other people. And I think that's the spirit, especially in light of the situation that we're going through now. I think that's the spirit that we have to carry. It's that we are all in this together, and we are going to pull through this, but we have to do it together.
Exactly. I think we're finding that now. at the time of the inception of this literature festival, which is called Lockdown for a reason, because we're doing this at a time, you know, when COVID-19 is stalking the land. And I'm seeing increasing signs of people remembering what a sense of community and what communal responsibility is all about. For those that had forgotten it, they're suddenly remembering in a pretty quick way, and it's a delight to see. Please, Afra, can I ask you to perform again for us?
Yes. So the second poem I'm doing is a poem called Shira'. So Shira' is the Arabic word for sail, like sail of a boat. And when I was first approached to write this poem, they had called me, and Shira' it's an entrepreneurship center in Sharjah. They've been in my corner since day one. And when they called me and said, you know, we are doing our launch and we would love to have you do a poem. And I was holding the phone and I said, are you sure you have the right person? I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about being an entrepreneur. I don't know that I'm the right person for this. And it was through this process and due largely in part to them that I realized that really the artist is the ultimate entrepreneur.
Yes. And
you have to be. And often it's a journey that is, a lot of the time you feel like the underdog. A lot of the time, you know, I always say that this is a song for the underdogs, because so often nobody claps for the underdog, and the underdog doesn't know that they're doing a good job. And it's just a very strange and often solitary journey. So I wanted to bring that all into a poem, and I wanted to make this the poem for all the entrepreneurs and for all the artists and for all the writers. So this is a poem called Shira'. The fastest way to kill a poetry performance is to be generic. The fastest way to kill a dream is to suffocate it. Squeeze out every last breath, wedge it between the words realistic and unattainable, wrap it in blankets of self-doubt and tell it has no place here. Ostracize and outcast until no one recognizes its face or speaks its name. Kill off passion. Make sure that if the dream ever dares to show its face here again, the dream has no friends and nowhere to stay. So when they tell you, you can be anything you want to be. They mean something within reason, within the constructs of a society that dictates what is acceptable. Find a job that is acceptable. Silence your passion, watch your dreams, like a silent movie on repeat. When I tell them I'm a poet, when I tell them I am a poet, they look at me like a failed business venture. Sorry, we can't meet with you. Call us back when you have a stronger proposal. Poets and entrepreneurs both know convention is just convenience we use to convince ourselves that our dreams are worthless and we are worth less than is customary, convicting us with no judge and a fact-lacking jury. Your Honor, I move to dismiss the motion of the notion of the continuous, quote, status quo. You can't quell my concern. Yes, you can direct quote me on that. Let's recap. They say they like my flow, but I know that it means that we object to this rejection. Let the record show we know it is never about the final destination. It is about how badly we want to get there. This is for people who want to get there. The underdogs, who know they can beat the odds when the deck is clearly stacked against them. These are people who know it can happen when muggles believe in magic. They look to horizons like Frodo leaving the Shire scared, but determined they are not misfits. They are perfectly placed apostrophes. The difference between Y-O-U apostrophe R-E and your this is about survivors like a skin grown thick like armor, riding through life like a battlefield. We are knuckles bruised from knocking on doors that said they'd never open because our ideas were never good enough. But the same people rejecting us, the same people rejecting us are the same people who use the flower crown filter and forget that Snapchat was a startup. Those who stuff the makers of change like monsters in boxes and bedtime stories, forced to roam around under cover of darkness. The ones who forgot how sleep feels because their dreams are more important than rest. No wonder they say 2 a.m. was made for the artists. We know this is not the quickest way to become famous. It is about looking at what is and figuring out how to change it. It is about life slapping you across the face and you screaming back, I got this. This is me. This is me being asked to spell the word unnecessary in the 6th grade spelling bee, replacing a C with an S, 2 S's with a C, tripping over my words, not seeing what I was saying, stuttering off the stage in shame and coming back a slam queen. This is for him who knows this app can revolutionize the way we see business, saves his allowance because investors won't take a chance on someone armed with just a dream and a business plan under the age of 19. This is for her, with a passion that can outshine the stars in a voice like an anthem. We've lost too many stars to this life's brutal clenched fist. This is not a motivational speech. This is a call to create communities of creators, engineers of ideas. It is knowing that no amount of training and social conditioning can change what you believe in, so open your arms. your hearts out like a welcome mat. Turn on the porch lights. It's been a starless night for far too long. Let the dreams know. Let the dreams know. It's time to come home. Thank you.
Yalla Afra. Yalla Afra. Shukran.
I love that you were snapping.
Oh, could you, was I doing that?
Yes, it's involuntary now, which is why I love it.
You taught me. Please explain why I was snapping my fingers while you were performing.
So with the spoken word, it is customary to snap if you hear something that you like or something you relate to, or if you just want to be supportive. It lets the performer know that they're doing a good job, and it creates a sense of community within the audience. And it's also less distracting than clapping. So you are encouraged to snap if you hear something that you like during a poem. With me, you're also encouraged to clap because it doesn't really bother me, but snapping is customary.
You know what, I was completely unaware I was doing that. Well, thank you, because you taught me how to do that. And I think it's such a lovely thing to be able to do while someone's performing their heart out. That gentle sort of, there's that fantastic word, susurration. You get the susurration of finger snaps across the room while someone's performing. It's just a beautiful thing to behold. Where would you like this poetry to take you? What would good look like in 10 years' time? I mean, I could see you in the Albert Hall, in the Carnegie, performing like that, because you stand in this place between sort of classical poetry and rap in a way, and you create this space that is very much your own. And I'm wondering whether you have an ambition, whether you have a strategy.
I want to take it everywhere. I've been so blessed that my poetry has taken me all over the world. I did the Jaipur Literature Festival for the first time this year, and hopefully, you know, to take it everywhere. I want it to go everywhere, and I want everybody to experience it. And I think that art and performance in particular is one of the things that really creates, we talk about creating cultural understanding all the time, but I think this is one of the things that actually accomplishes that. And it creates that bridge. So I'd like to take it, you know, everywhere. I'd love to do university tours. I'd love to do more community work, more schools, school workshops and things like that. So I would love to just have it everywhere.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see that everywhere as well. And if you are interested in getting in touch with Afra, she has a fantastic website, Afra Atiq, AFRAATIQ.com. And there's a very good contact button on there. So if you run events at your university, your opera house, or your school, get hold of Afra and get her to come and see you. One last question from me, Afra, before we wrap. We obviously are hoping at Lockdown, are hoping to build to an audience of many tens of thousands, from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds, from 3-year-olds to 30-year-olds. For anybody that's seen you perform here today with us, who thinks, I'd love to be able to do that, could you give them how to write like Afra Atiq 101, please?
Okay, no pressure.
It's a hard one, but you can do it.
I think the most important thing is to understand the validity of your voice, and understand that your voice is valid, that your story is valid, that what you are saying is valid, and nobody can tell your story in the way that you can. And I think that I could teach you the mechanics and the techniques and all the technical aspects, but at the core of all of this, you need to understand, not even understand, you need to believe in the power of your words. And you need to believe that you are capable of taking those words out into the world. Your voice is valid, your story is valid, and you have the power to tell that story, your story. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I could give. And also to just to do it, to not be intimidated, just to try it out.
Nelson Mandela had a great phrase, which is, I never lose, I either win or learn. And that's sort of what writing is about. You can never lose, but you learn from every mistake. Also, I like what you say, have faith and have value in your own words, because the one thing that I think you have been a great illustration of is the value you place on your words shows people the value they should place on your words and on your work. And it's a joy to talk to you, and a joy to hear you perform. We are very honored to have you here. On behalf of Lockdown LitFest, Afra, thank you very much indeed. Very good luck with your PhD. I know it's been put back because of lockdown. Know that you have the support and the goodwill of the whole team of Lockdown LitFest. And I hope you're the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Afra Atiq performing for us from Dubai. In her own, I'm slightly blown away, as I always am when I talk to Afra. As I said, please go visit her at afraatiq.com. And if you can find a place for her in a huge hall, you'll get an audience. Afra, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I always say, thank you for joining us. Be well, be safe, take good care of those you love. Thank you very much.